Ta tela chirdu tanda jalboto handala.
Continuing from where we left off this morning, if you remember the general outline of the Doha for the king, it treats of first the ground, then the path, and then the fruition. Within the presentation of the ground, there's a presentation of what is to be abandoned, that is to say, bewilderment with regard to the ground, and what is to be realized, which is the nature of the ground itself. In the verse 19 and verse 20, what is presented is the need to abandon the bewilderment, the samsaric bewilderment, and also attachment to logical reasoning and inferential valid cognition. Following that, the 21st and 22nd stanzas, verses, will deal with the path. Of these verses, the first, verse 19, is concerned with how or why we wander in samsara and how the bewildered appearances of samsara increase or spread. All samsara begins with ignorance, and here ignorance is referred to as a state of stupidity. Now, by its nature, a state of stupidity or stupor, a state of ignorance, is unclear. It is an absence of knowledge, an absence of understanding. From the point of view, or from the aspect of ignorance, which is the mere absence of knowledge, the absence of knowledge of absolute truth, then we could say that ignorance, or as it says in our text, stupidity, are a mere unclarity or lack of clarity. But at the same time, through that lack of recognition of absolute truth, there is a great clarity of stupidity and ignorance in the projection of relative truth. And as samsara increases, it becomes clearer and clearer. The basic nature that lies within each and every sentient being can be called Sugata Garbha or the Dharmadhatu. When we call it the Dharmadhatu, we are primarily referring to its aspect of emptiness. And when we call it Sugata Garbha, we are primarily referring to its aspect of lucidity or wisdom. Now, when this is not recognized, that state of absence of recognition is ignorance. And that is the beginning of the all-basis consciousness from among the 8 consciousnesses. The absence of recognition occurs because through the appearance of the lucidity aspect of the nature, the emptiness or empty aspect of the nature is unrecognized. Through that absence of recognition, through that ignorance and that arising of the 8th consciousness, the habit which gradually produce bewildered appearances accrue. As they accrue, from the 8th consciousness arises the 7th, the consciousness which is mental affliction or kleshas, and eventually the 6 functioning consciousnesses, the 5 sense consciousnesses and the mental consciousness. At that point, the structure of the bewildered appearances of samsara is fully established. So the process of the clarification or intensification of samsara is a process in which, as our text says, when stupidity is clear, wisdom is unclear. As the ignorance and stupidity of samsara become more and more vivid and more clear, the underlying wisdom becomes more and more unclear, more and more obscured. Now this is the same idea that was expressed in the previous 18th verse when it said, If a supreme gem is placed in a swampy mire, its radiance, however, will not be clear. The radiance of the wisdom is obscured by the intensity or clarity of the stupidity. With the arising of ignorance, or the all-basis consciousness, the ground for the accruing of habit is present. Now, the all-basis consciousness itself, while it is ignorance, is a mere cognitive lucidity. It is not an active state of bewilderment. Nevertheless, because it is the basis for the accruing of habit, it is the basis for the misapprehension of the existence of self, and on the basis of that, the misapprehension of the existence of other. Through the increased accruing of habits on the basis of that twofold misapprehension, the accruing which occurs on or in the all-basis consciousness, the 6 consciousnesses of the 6 gates arise. Now, the 5 sense consciousnesses arise as a result of the habits accrued in the all-basis, but at the same time, they are non-conceptual consciousnesses. The 5 sense consciousnesses are limited in their function to the unique function of each. That is to say, the eye consciousness just sees, the ear consciousness just hears, and so forth. They do not appraise, recognize, judge, or in any way conceptualize what they see and hear, and so on. The 6th consciousness, the mental consciousness, is that which appraises, identifies, and judges what is experienced or perceived by the sense consciousnesses. It is the 6th consciousness that therefore makes errors such as taking different things to be essentially one or the same, and so forth. At this point, with the development of all 8 consciousnesses, there is a state of full-blown or coarse bewilderment. And that is what is called here the increased clarity of bewilderment or stupidity. Now, as it says in the verse, when ignorance and stupidity are clear, wisdom is unclear, and vice versa. When wisdom is clear, the nature of things, the nature of the mind, is realized. But when, on the other hand, bewilderment, stupidity, and ignorance are clear, this nature is obscured. The obscuration of ignorance leads to klesha, or mental afflictions, which lead to the accumulation of karmas, or afflicted actions, which lead to suffering. Now, strictly speaking, we would say that not everything that results from actions is suffering, because actions are of different types, and therefore their results accord with this. But nevertheless, directly or indirectly, the results of afflicted actions are suffering. For example, an experience of suffering is obviously suffering, is the suffering of suffering. But even an experience of happiness or well-being that arises as the result of afflicted action, because it is impermanent, will change into a state of suffering. And in that sense, even states of temporary well-being are the suffering of change. Furthermore, the pervasive environment in which this occurs, that is to say, impermanence, which causes everything to turn eventually into suffering, is the all-pervasive suffering, or the pervasiveness of suffering. So, with the development of these 3 types or 3 aspects of suffering, the full bewildered projections or appearances of samsara have occurred. In verse 19, an analogy is presented for how the progressive clarification or intensification of stupidity causes suffering. The analogy is from a seedling arises. With the seedling as a cause, small branches appear. It starts with a seed, and the seed here is like ignorance. You have a seed, you plant it in the ground, and therefore it eventually produces a sprout or seedling from which emerges a stalk and eventually branches and so forth. In the same way, through the progressive intensification of bewilderment or stupidity, we eventually come to suffer. We remain, therefore, in the midst of the bewildered appearances of samsara, which are always, in one way or another, suffering. Sometimes we experience manifest suffering, the suffering which is suffering. Sometimes we experience the suffering of change, and sometimes we just experience pervasive suffering, but we always experience suffering. Now, at the same time as this analogy shows us how bewilderment increases and suffering develops, by implication, it also shows us how to put an end to this. What we want is to stop suffering. Therefore, since the cause, the immediate cause of suffering is mental affliction or kleshas, clearly to get rid of the three sufferings, we have to eradicate the kleshas. When we look to see what the cause of the kleshas is, we see that the cause of the kleshas is this bewilderment, ignorance, or stupidity. Therefore, to get rid of the kleshas, we obviously have to get rid of our stupidity. Now, remember that stupidity begins or began with not seeing dharmata, our own nature. Therefore, clearly the remedy to stupidity, that which will get rid of it, is to see that nature exactly as it is. If one sees the nature, dharmata, stupidity, ignorance, bewilderment will vanish. Now, from the point of view of the sutras, which emphasize vastness, we would refer to this nature as dharmata, the nature of all things, which is often explained as the unity of expanse and wisdom. From the point of view of secret mantra, which emphasizes profundity, and therefore does not focus so much on the vast scope of the nature, we would refer to this as the nature of our mind. You can think of it as the nature of the sixth consciousness or the nature of the eighth consciousness. In either case, it is by looking at the nature of your mind that ignorance will be removed. We are bewildered, ignorant, and stupid because we have never looked at, seen, and realized this nature. Therefore, if we directly recognize the nature, we eliminate ignorance, which is like the seed, and therefore the seedling will not appear, the stalk will not appear, and the branches will not appear. Verse 20 is concerned with the relationship between the discernments arising from hearing and thinking on the one hand, and from meditating on the other. It is concerned with the relative importance of these two aspects, and with showing that meditation is more important, finally, than hearing and reflection. Through cultivating the proper discernment of hearing and thinking, one can establish that emptiness is the nature of all things. In order to do this, one employs various modes of logical analysis or reasoning to show that with regard to external things, the coarse are merely aggregates of the subtle themselves further aggregates, and so on, until one shows that things have no true existence. And with regard to the mind, one determines that in the same way, the mind is an aggregate, and so forth. The types of reasoning used to determine this in the context of hearing and thinking are the 4 or 5 great reasonings of the Middle Way School, such as the refutation of things being truly one or many, the refutation of production through the 4 extremes, and so forth. Now, doing this definitely assists the understanding of emptiness. But what it produces is an intellectual or conceptual certainty. If you retain attachment to that conceptual certainty, to that conceptual view of emptiness, then you prevent that conceptual view from performing its true function. Because the purpose of generating the discernments of hearing and reflection is to become certain that emptiness is the nature of all things, so that you are inspired to thereafter meditate on it and experience and realize it directly. If you do not practice meditation, then you will not be able, through that conceptual certainty alone, to relinquish attachment to the ordinary. This can only be relinquished by the third type of discernment, the discernment that arises from meditation, which is, compared to the other two, very clear or lucid, because it is based on direct valid cognition. Therefore, our stanza says, if in analyzing the mind with the reasoning of neither one nor many, you discard the clear here refers to the clarity of that discernment which arises from meditation. Now, about the relationship between the practice of meditation and hearing and reflection, Jetsun Milarepa at one time advised Lord Gampopa as follows: when practicing mahamudra, do not engage in logical analysis. If you do, non-conceptual wisdom will vanish. In that way, if you remain attached to conceptual view, the view arrived at through logical analysis, you will not be able to transcend the bewildered appearances of samsara, and therefore will continue to fall into existence. Now, our stanza says, while seeing that suffering you fall into its bottomless pit, how could one have anything but compassion for this? This means that if, having arrived at a conceptual certainty of emptiness through the application of reasonings such as there being neither one nor many and so forth, you maintain your attachment or retain attachment to that conceptual certainty and fail to make proper use of that certainty through the practice of meditation, then you are like someone who knowingly jumps into a bottomless pit. The bottomless pit here is samsara, and beings are constantly jumping into that pit, but they do so without knowing that they're doing it. So in a sense, it's not hard to understand. What is even more tragic, however, than jumping without knowing you're doing it into the bottomless pit is when someone knows it's a bottomless pit and still jumps into it. And that's what you're doing if you retain attachment to the conceptual certainty achieved through analysis and do not practice meditation. Now, here, our text implies that you should not employ the middle way reasonings such as neither one nor many at all, and should just practice meditation. In practice, it is helpful from time to time to continue to use these reasonings. But what you need to ensure is that you do not become attached to the maintenance of the conceptuality or the conceptual certainty which you generate through the reasonings. So the problem is not the reasonings or the certainty they produce, but attachment to it. For example, in the quotation from Jetsun Milarepa, while meditating on mahamudra, do not engage in logical analysis, non-conceptual wisdom will vanish if you do. In fact, it is not the logical analysis or the certainty that it produces that is the problem. It is if you become attached to that certainty and therefore neglect direct experience through the practice of meditation. So what this verse is saying is, do not become so attached to the logical analysis of external phenomena and so forth that you ignore the practice of meditation and the development of direct experience. And by implication, since our text warns us of this, it is saying that there is a danger of this kind of attachment occurring. That completes the presentation of ground Mahamudra in 4 sections in our text. We next, therefore, turn to path Mahamudra. With regard to the path, we need to enter the path, and having entered it, we need to reach the end of the path, which is the fruition. Just entering the path is not enough. In order to reach the end, we have to make sure that we enter the path correctly, and therefore enter the correct path, and that we avoid the wrong path. Therefore, here, in the presentation of path Mahamudra, there are 2 sections. The first is discarding attachment to mistaken paths, and the second is a presentation of the authentic or actual path of Mahamudra. The first of these, teaching us to discard attachment to mistaken paths, has 8 sections. The first of these 8 sections is verse 21. Essentially, verse 21 seems like a generalized criticism of the path of method. In fact, what Saraha is saying in verse 21 is not that the path of method does not work, that it will not lead to the fruition. It's that if the path of method is not accompanied by a recognition of the mind's nature, it won't work. The path of method alone, which is to say the pursuit of the path of method without the aspect of the path of liberation, the recognition of mind's nature, will not lead to liberation and omniscience. On the other hand, if the path of method includes or is accompanied by the recognition of the mind's nature, it will effectively lead to the fruition. In this regard, there is a difference between the path of method and the path of liberation. Probably the most effective or best way to practice the path is with the integration of the path of liberation and the path of method. If that is not possible, however, one can practice the path of liberation alone, without the path of method, and it will still be a good and effective path. It will lead to the abandonment of what is to be abandoned, the realization of what is to be realized, and therefore the fruition. But if, on the other hand, one attempts to practice the path of method in the complete absence of the path of liberation, this will not lead to any significant or worthy result. Now, in verse 21, Saraha is specifically criticizing the view that the practice of karma mudra alone, in the absence of the wisdom of mahamudra, will lead to awakening. And the analogy that he brings up is, for example, if you are at home in your house and enjoying all the good things that you have in your house, you can enjoy them. If you sit outside your house, refusing to go in, and merely talk about the good things that are in your house, you can talk about them, but you can't actually enjoy them. In the same way, when you attempt to practice the path of method in isolation, without the path of liberation, you're like the person who is sitting outside his house and therefore not enjoying the things within it that he is describing. So verse 21 is about the practicing or criticism of the practice of karma mudra in isolation from the wisdom of mahamudra. The next subject, which is described in verse 22, is a similar criticism of attempting to practice the disciplines of the channels, winds, and drops without the aspect of the path of liberation or mahamudra. The type of practice that Saraha is referring to here is the practice where you manipulate your channels, winds, and drops, and thereby experience various things. Now, we do practice using the channels, winds, and drops, and we derive benefit from doing so. But the benefit of these practices consists of the fact that they can increase or enhance your experience of your mind's nature, your experience of the path of liberation. Therefore, if there is no experience whatsoever of the path of liberation, no practice of mahamudra, and no experience of the mind's nature to begin with, simply working with the channels, winds, and drops in isolation will not produce any significant result. Not only is the practice of the channels, winds, and drops without any experience of the nature of mind of no benefit, but it may actually be dangerous. As it says in our verse, overwhelmed, the yogi faints away. So here, in this Doha, which is about the practice of mahamudra, there is a clear emphasis on the path of liberation. It's important to understand, however, that what is being said here is not that the path of means is invalid or useless, but that for it to be effective and genuine, the path of liberation must be present. In short, the path of liberation is more important. This is not that different from the previous stanzas dealing with the importance of not relying solely upon the conceptual certainty derived from the reasonings of neither one nor many, or the wisdom, the discernments of hearing and reflection. Of greater importance than the conceptual certainty, which is the discernment arising from hearing and reflection, is the direct realization, which is the discernment arising from meditation. In the same way, of greater importance than the practice of the methods of karma mudra or the channels, winds, and drops is the practice of mahamudra. In short, what really matters, what is of utmost importance, is recognition of the nature of one's mind. If this recognition is present and the path of method is not practiced, there will still be liberation. And if this recognition is absent, no matter how much you practice the path of method, there will not be liberation. We're going to stop there for this afternoon and now practice a little meditation.